The sun had long dipped below the horizon when the moving truck rumbled into the driveway of the crumbling Victorian manor. Situated on the outskirts of Blackthorn Hollow, the house loomed like a shadowy spectre, its turrets clawing at the sky. Katherine and her 7-year-old daughter Lila stepped out of the car, their breaths fogging in the frigid autumn air. Katherine had bought the manor at an auction, desperate to start anew after her divorce. She hadn't cared about the whispered rumors surrounding the property, dismissing them as local superstition. "Mom, this house looks sad," Lila said softly, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her wide eyes scanned the darkened windows as if expecting to see someone, or something, watching. "It's just old, sweetie," Katherine said, forcing a smile. "Once we fix it up, it'll be beautiful." Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and decay. The movers worked quickly, unloading the furniture into the dimly lit rooms, eager to leave before nightfall. As Lila wandered through the cavernous hallways, her small footsteps echoed eerily. She stopped abruptly in what appeared to be a forgotten nursery, its walls peeling with faded pastel paint. In the corner of the room sat a porcelain doll on a small wooden rocking chair. It was pristine despite the dust and decay surrounding it, its glass eyes glinting unnervingly in the dim light. The doll wore a crimson dress trimmed with lace, and its painted lips were curled into a smile that seemed far too knowing. "Mommy, look!" Lila called out, her voice tinged with awe. Katherine entered the room and froze. The doll looked out of place, as if it had been placed there recently. "Where did that come from?" she muttered, picking it up. It felt oddly heavy for its size, and cold, like stone. "Can I keep her?" Lila asked, already cradling the doll as if it were a baby. "I don't know, honey." Katherine hesitated, unnerved by the doll's unblinking stare, but Lila's pleading eyes wore her down. "All right, just keep it in your room." That night, as Katherine unpacked downstairs, she heard a faint noise, a rhythmic creaking, like the sound of a rocking chair. She paused, straining to listen. The sound stopped. She brushed it off as her imagination, too tired to investigate. Upstairs, Lila sat cross-legged on her bed, the doll propped against her pillows. "Good night, Lily," she whispered, stroking its hair. The name had come to her unbidden, as if the doll had whispered it into her ear. "Good night, Lila," came a faint, almost imperceptible reply. Lila's eyes widened, but she didn't scream. Instead, a slow, dreamy smile spread across her face. Downstairs, Katherine felt a sudden chill creep over her as the lights flickered briefly. The house groaned, the way old houses often do, but tonight it sounded more like a warning. The days that followed were marked by a creeping tension that Katherine couldn't quite explain. The house felt heavier somehow, as though it were suffused with an invisible presence. Lila, however, seemed unfazed. In fact, she was happier than Katherine had seen her in months. "Lily and I played tea party today," Lila chirped one morning at breakfast, the doll perched stiffly beside her. "She told me all her secrets." Katherine frowned. "Honey, dolls don't talk. You're just imagining it." Lila giggled. "She's not just a doll, Mommy. She's my friend." That night, Katherine awoke to a faint scratching sound coming from the ceiling. Her heart raced as she strained to identify it. Rats, she decided, even though the sound seemed far too deliberate. She rolled over, pulling the blankets tightly around herself, but sleep refused to come. The following evening, as Katherine sat in the dimly lit living room sifting through boxes, the creaking began again. This time it was unmistakable, the sound of a rocking chair. She froze, her hands clutching a stack of old photographs. "Lila?" she called out. No response. With trepidation, She climbed the stairs to Lila's room. The door was ajar, and the faint glow of Lila's bedside lamp spilled into the hallway. As she stepped inside, she saw Lila asleep in bed, her chest rising and falling rhythmically. The doll sat on the rocking chair in the corner, moving ever so slightly. Katherine's stomach churned. "Must be a draft," she whispered to herself, though the windows were firmly shut. She picked up the doll and set it on the dresser. Its glass eyes seemed to glint in the dim light, following her every move. The next day, Katherine decided to investigate. She searched the house, hoping to find some logical explanation for the strange occurrences. In the attic, buried under years of dust and cobwebs, she discovered a small wooden chest. Inside were yellowed papers, faded photographs, and a brittle journal bound in leather. The photographs sent a chill down her spine. They depicted a young girl with strikingly familiar features, holding the same crimson-dressed doll. Scribbled across the back of one photo were the words, "Lily, 1912, gone but not forgotten." Katherine flipped open the journal. The pages were filled with looping handwriting that described a girl named Lily, her tragic death, and her mother's desperate attempt to preserve her spirit. The final entry read, "She lives within the doll now. Forever, my sweet Lily." Katherine slammed the journal shut, her hands trembling. That night, she tucked Lila into bed and kissed her forehead. "You're safe, my love," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. As she turned off the light and left the room, the faintest of giggles drifted into the hallway, too soft to be Lila's. The atmosphere in the manor grew heavier with each passing day. Katherine's attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences became harder to sustain. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls, and the once sporadic creaking of the rocking chair turned into a nightly symphony of dread. Lila, meanwhile, grew more withdrawn. She no longer played outside or asked to watch her favorite cartoons. Instead, she spent hours in her room, whispering to Lily. Katherine stood outside the door one afternoon, listening. "I'll do it if you promise you'll stay," Lila said softly. The reply was too faint to hear, but Lila giggled afterward, a sound that sent a shiver up Katherine's spine. She pushed the door open abruptly, catching her daughter mid-conversation. "Who were you talking to?" Katherine asked, her voice taut. "Lily," Lila said matter-of-factly. Katherine's eyes flicked to the doll. It sat propped on the bed, its painted lips curling in that familiar, unnerving smile. "It's just a doll, Lila. You know that, right?" Lila frowned. "Why don't you like her, Mommy? She likes you. She says you're pretty." The comment made Katherine's skin crawl. "It's time for bed," she said quickly, brushing off Lila's protest. That night, Katherine locked the doll in a wooden trunk and stored it in the attic. As she closed the attic door, a wave of relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. Around midnight, a piercing scream jolted her awake. She raced to Lila's room, heart pounding. Lila sat upright in bed, her face pale and tear-streaked. "She's mad at you, Mommy!" Lila cried, pointing to the corner of the room. Katherine turned, her breath catching in her throat. The rocking chair swayed violently, empty yet animated, slamming against the floor with each arc. "Where is the doll?" Lila wailed. "She doesn't like being alone." "She's gone," Katherine snapped, her fear boiling into frustration. "It's just a doll, Lila. That's all it ever was." The next morning, Katherine resolved to leave the house. She began packing their belongings, ignoring the whispers of unease that seemed to emanate from the walls. As she boxed up items in the kitchen, she heard Lila's voice from the living room. "I found her, Mommy!" Lila called cheerfully. Katherine froze. Slowly, she stepped into the living room, her blood running cold at the sight before her. Lila held the doll tightly, its crimson dress as pristine as ever, its painted eyes gleaming with unnatural light. "How did you—" Katherine began, but the words faltered. The attic had been locked. "She said she doesn't want us to leave," Lila said, her voice distant, as if it wasn't entirely her own. Katherine lunged for the doll, but the moment her hands touched it, a searing cold shot through her body. Her vision blurred, and for a split second, she thought she heard laughter, high-pitched, cruel, and unmistakably inhuman. That night, the rocking chair creaked louder than ever, its movement synchronized with the whispers that filled the house. And in her dreams, Katherine saw Lily, pale, smiling, and holding the doll in her tiny hands. Katherine had reached her breaking point. The doll's presence was no longer just eerie. It was malevolent. Every night the whispers grew louder, filling the house with an oppressive, unholy energy. Lila's behavior became more erratic. She often spoke in a voice that didn't sound like her own. Her eyes glazed with an unsettling emptiness. On the fourth night, Katherine decided to end it. She retrieved the journal from the attic, her hands trembling as she read its final pages. The words hinted at a ritual, a way to sever the bond between the doll and whatever dark force inhabited it. But the instructions were incomplete, smeared with water damage and age. "It doesn't matter," Katherine whispered. "I'll burn the damn thing if I have to." She waited until Lila was asleep before taking the doll and a can of lighter fluid to the backyard. The wind howled as though in protest, and the towering oak trees seemed to lean toward her, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Katherine placed the doll on a makeshift pyre of dry leaves and wood. "You're not taking my daughter," she hissed through gritted teeth. She doused the doll in lighter fluid and struck a match. As the flames leapt to life, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the house. Katherine spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. Lila was at the window, her face pale and twisted in anguish. "Mommy, stop! You're hurting her!" Lila shrieked, pounding on the glass. Katherine hesitated, but the flames roared higher, consuming the doll's crimson dress. Suddenly, a force slammed into her, knocking her backward. The fire extinguished instantly, as if doused by an unseen hand. The doll lay untouched, its glass eyes gleaming with a sinister light. Lila's voice echoed across the yard, cold and detached. "You shouldn't have done that, Mommy. Lily is very angry." Katherine looked up in horror as Lila stepped outside, her small frame moving unnaturally, her head tilting at an odd angle. "She says you need to stay with us forever." "No," Katherine whispered, scrambling to her feet. "You're my daughter, not hers." Lila laughed, a sound that didn't belong to her. "We're one now, Mommy. You can't take her from me." Desperate, Katherine grabbed the doll and ran toward the old well at the edge of the property. Lila screamed behind her, but Katherine didn't stop. The air grew thick and oppressive, each step harder than the last. With a final burst of strength, Katherine hurled the doll into the well. A deafening roar erupted, shaking the ground beneath her. Shadows poured from the well like smoke, twisting and writhing in agony before dissipating into the night. Katherine collapsed, gasping for air. When she looked up, Lila stood frozen at the edge of the yard, her face blank and expressionless. "Lila?" Katherine called out tentatively. Her daughter blinked, her eyes clearing. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice small and scared. Katherine rushed to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over," she murmured, though her voice quivered. But as they walked back to the house, Katherine couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When she glanced over her shoulder, she saw the rocking chair on the porch, swaying ever so slightly in the still night air. The doll was gone, but the house had not yet let them go.